Welcome everyone. So thanks to Monsoon and FB Rice for this evening and our two company presenters. It's nice to see such a good crowd, and good interest. My name's Matt McNamara. I'm the Chief Investment Officer of Horizon 3 Healthcare Fund, and we're keen watchers of this sector. I just want to let you know that there's going to be two company presentations, as you know. They'll be followed by short Q&A. There have been some pre-submitted questions, so we'll cover those first, and we'll try and take all your questions. It's about 20 minutes, Rudy, 20 minutes presentation, and then some Q&A after that. 20 minutes total. Okay, so the presenters know about 15-minute presentation. Thank you. So our first company is Neuren. I need to declare my conflict here. Horizon 3 Healthcare is a happy investor in Neuren. It fits our investment mandate perfectly. They've been developing drug therapies for serious neurological disorders, as most of you would know, that emerge in early childhood and have limited treatment options. They've successfully commercialised trofinetide for Rett syndrome, turning Neuren into a $2.5 billion company. Hands up who's an investor in Neuren already. Happy people. Their second drug, NNZ-2591, currently in one phase 2 trial. They've completed 2 phase 2 trials, and those 2 trials have reported positive results, and I'm sure we're going to hear more about that. John Pilcher, the CEO, joined Neuren as CFO in 2013 and appointed CEO in 2020, has played a central role in all aspects of Neuren's R&D, commercial and corporate activities. Prior to joining Neuren, he was a member of the leadership team at Acrux, another successful Australian company, which included its IPO and listing on the ASX, development and FDA approval of 3 novel pharmaceutical products and a transforming license deal with Eli Lilly in 2010. John is a chartered accountant and holds a degree in biotechnology from the University of Reading. John, welcome to the stage.
Thank you, Matt. It's scary how long ago a lot of that stuff was that Matt's just been through. Just add my thanks to both Monsoon and FB Rice for tonight. Very much appreciate that, and thanks to all of you for coming out on a really stunning Melbourne day. I was in the US last week, and it's not been great coming back to, even though I'm very used to it here, it's not been great coming back to this. Okay, so I always have to point out there's going to be some forward-looking statements in what I say in some of the slides, that subject to risks that could lead to different outcomes. So, great to see some of you put your hands up as Neuren shareholders. Thank you for that. But there are a lot who didn't, so I'm not going to assume that you all know exactly what we're doing. So let me just take a few minutes to quickly explain a bit more what we do. So we focus completely on neurodevelopmental disorders. So these, as Matt said, are serious conditions that you have from birth, but you don't really know. Parents don't know you've got them until early childhood, and unfortunately cause a terribly wide range of issues that affect just about every aspect of life. You can see at the bottom of the slide there the things that are affected, which is everything. There are no approved treatments for any of them other than for Rett syndrome. So we had the first ever product approved to treat Rett syndrome last year, which I'll talk more about. So massive unmet need here. Fortunately, these things are not degenerative. So mostly, not always, sadly, but mostly kids will live into adulthood. But it's just a very profound, severe issue for both the patients and their families for life. So that's what we're trying to do something about. 6 different syndromes across the top of the page there, all caused by different genetic mutations. And yet the kids look very similar clinically, and that's because a common feature is that downstream from these mutations, the connections between the neurons in the brain don't form properly, signalling is not happening properly, and that impacts just about everything that happens in your body. So that's why you get this wide range of problems. So we have 2 drugs which are both trying to do the same thing effectively, and that's improve the way IGF-1 works in your brain, so critical growth factor, which is involved in forming new connections between these brain cells and maintaining the ones that are there. So we're not fixing the genetic mutation, but we're also not just trying to treat one symptom here. We're trying to treat the syndrome by improving what's happening in the brain. Both drugs are taken as liquids twice daily, so very easy dose form for these kids. So this is where our pipeline stands today. So lead drug called DAYBUE now in the market with our partner Acadia Pharmaceuticals, has global rights to that drug. And then our second drug, NNZ-2591, is in phase 2 trials, as Matt mentioned, across multiple indications, and I'll talk more about that in due course. All of these indications are orphan drug indications, so we are talking here about rare disease, but it's not ultra rare. So there are many thousands of patients in each of these indications, and the benefits of orphan drug designation are more favourable pricing, better run through the regulators, and more protection against generic competition once you get to market. So even though we're talking thousands of patients, not millions of patients, you can make very large revenues from these indications. Financial position is very strong. In 31 March we reported $243 million of cash, and that's because we had a maiden profit last year of $157 million. Driven by the revenue that we've got from Acadia. So there were three main elements to it. We got 145 million from our expanded deal with Acadia, 59 million from a milestone payment, and 27 million from royalties. These are not one-offs, because next year we're going to get bigger royalties, another milestone payment, and if Acadia sells the priority review voucher that they have, our share of that will go into revenue as well. So we're in a really strong position. And what it means is that we can make the right decisions. We're not forced into making the wrong decisions because we're compromised from a financial point of view, which can often happen to small companies. So, that financial strength that DAYBUE has brought us is really important. So for investors, it's always, the science is complex, but the business has always been pretty simple, really. There are three things that have driven the value to where it is today and continue to do so. First thing is our share of DAYBUE in Rett syndrome in the US through the deal with Acadia. Second thing is our share of DAYBUE outside the US, and again that comes from Acadia. And then the third thing is our second drug, NNZ-2591, the big value upside from multiple indications. So we have this nice combination of near-term cash flows from DAYBUE and then big value upside from 2591. So as always, I'll just run quickly through each of these three elements. We'll start with DAYBUE, the first one, DAYBUE in the US. So it was launched in April last year by Acadia, first ever treatment for Rett syndrome, a very proud moment for us after a 10-year journey to get there. And really, it's gone fantastically well. I mean, in less than 9 months of sales in 2023, did $177 million of sales, and the guidance for this current year is 370 to 420 million. So that's a fantastic outcome. It's at least a year ahead of where everyone thought it would be. But there's plenty of room for more growth. So there's currently 5,000 known Rett patients in the US, about 1,300 tried treatment so far. So there's still a long way to go from a growth point of view. And we in Acadia both think that there's actually 6,000 to 9,000 Rett patients, and more are getting diagnosed all the time. That 5,000 was 4,500 when it launched, so it's already grown 500 since launch. So the revenue we get, two forms: royalties on all sales between 10 and 15%. Currently, some is at 10, some is at 12. It goes up as the sales go up. And then we get these one-off milestone payments on the bottom right of the slide there, and we'd expect to get the first one of $50 million. We'll should earn that this year, which will go into our revenue. So fantastic start. I think Acadia's done an outstanding job so far, and really has made a huge difference to us, as you've seen. Just quickly mention that Canada, which is part of this original North America deal, Acadia's filed for approval there. It's under priority review, expecting a decision before the end of the year. And the beauty of that is that goes into the sales calculation at whatever the marginal royalty rate is. So if we're earning in the 12% tier, those Canadian sales will get 12% royalty to us. So that's the first element of our value. The second element is DAYBUE or trofinetide outside North America. So we last year expanded our deal with Acadia to make it global instead of North America only. They paid us $100 million up front for the privilege, but we also got great back-end economics, so milestone payments similar to the original deal, plus royalties that are much higher. So they start mid-teens and go up to the low 20%, and much higher. So very good economics on the back end, but of course they've got to get to market before we're going to get that. So very encouraged to see the progress they've already made. So Europe, which is obviously the most important next target, they've done the first element of the regulatory process, and they're expecting to file a full application in the first quarter of next year. And then Japan would be the next biggest market. They're meeting very soon with the Japanese regulatory authority. So they're making good progress there, and the beauty, I guess, of this whole situation is that in the short term we can get growth from the US as the sales increase and the penetration increases, but in the longer term, when other geographies come on stream, then we'll get longer term growth from that as well. So it's a very healthy position to be in. So that's the first two elements. I'm going to spend a bit longer on 2591 because A, it's more complicated, but also I think more exciting and potentially higher value. So, NNZ-2591, the second drug, as I said, right from the start, there's been a multiple indications, strategy and opportunity. And so far, we've had 2 positive phase 2 results, as Matt referred to earlier, so in Phelan-McDermott syndrome and Pitt-Hopkins syndrome. I'm going to show you some data from both of those in a minute. We've got a third result coming from Angelman syndrome in the third quarter of this year. And then we're also doing work in Prader-Willi syndrome and also some other indications that we haven't disclosed what they are yet. We're doing preclinical work in those, and so they're going to come into the mix in due course. And then the final potential upside for 2591 is that Acadia has rights to 2 indications for 2591, which is Rett and Fragile X. The reason they have that is that those were the indications envisaged for DAYBUE originally. And obviously Acadia didn't want us coming along with a potentially better product competing with DAYBUE. So to protect against that, they have the rights to those indications. But if they choose to develop in those, we get the same economics as we do for trofinetide, so it's a potential upside. But it's not the main game for us. With Phelan-McDermott syndrome, we are preparing madly for a end of phase 2 meeting with the FDA in the third quarter of this year to propose what needs to be done as a registration trial. So that's a really important meeting that we are preparing for at the moment. Before I show you the data from the trials, just a quick bit of information about what the trials were. So in all of these phase 2 trials and across these different indications, we have treated kids, so straight into kids. From the development, you go into adults first from a safety point of view. We didn't straight into kids, and we treated for 13 weeks, which was the same length of time as the Rett phase 3 trial. So giving the drug optimum chance to show its effect. One other thing we're doing at the same time, which is really important, is preparing for phase 3. We didn't want to get to the end of phase 2 and have a long wait before you get into phase 3. So we've been doing all the preparation you have to do, particularly on the manufacturing side, to be ready for phase 3. And we're actually right now making the drug for the phase 3 trials at the moment with the commercial process at the commercial manufacturer. So we're very, very well advanced in that respect. So just an overview of the results before I show you the data. So we feel that these first 2 results, both positive and both very similar, have validated our thought that this is a multiple indication opportunity here. Safety was very important in these first trials in kids, and we're very pleased with the profile. There's really nothing remarkable in either trial. So that puts us in a good position with FDA. It's always, they're looking at the risk-benefit balance. So the lower the risk, the better position you are in that balance. And then the efficacy, depending on the measure we use, but between 73% and 89% of the kids showed improvement. So that's a fantastic outcome, better than we could have hoped for. And so overall, I think we're really happy with the results, and as I said, I think they validate our multi-indication strategy. So now I'm going to just spend a little bit of time on Phelan-McDermid syndrome, and then a little bit of time on Pitt-Hopkins syndrome, and a quick bit of information about the numbers of people we're talking about here. So Phelan-McDermid syndrome, so in fact all of these conditions, there are two different measures of the number of patients. There's the theoretical number based on how many people have got the genetic mutation based on prevalence studies done around the world, and then there's the measure of how many patients do you know by name that have been diagnosed today. So Phelan-McDermid syndrome is actually theoretically 3 times the size of Rett syndrome, so a much bigger opportunity, but it's been heavily underdiagnosed in the past. No one's ever done any development work in it before, so it's behind where Rett is from a diagnosis point of view. So there's about a third of the Rett patients currently known today. So that's about 1,700 in the US, about 3,500 worldwide. But it's growing, and I think the fact that we're now doing work in this is going to make it grow. Genetic testing is becoming much more available and lower cost and better technology. Phelan-McDermid syndrome historically has often been misdiagnosed as autism, so we think there's a rich vein of patients there. So we expect this number to grow very rapidly now as we move into the last phase of development before we get to market. Right, just going to show you some data, so let me quickly explain what this is. So, this is from the trial. This is the measure called the CGI, Clinical Global Impression of Improvement. It's the physician scoring how much the kids have improved or not on treatment. A 4 score is no change, so 3 and below is improvement, and 1 is the best score you can get. So the lower, the better. On the left-hand side there, it's patient by patient, so all the patients that were in the trial, and you can see there are 2 who got a score of 1, the best possible score, 8 who got a score of 2, and 6 who got a score of 3. They all improved, so 16 out of 18 improved, and the average was 2.4, which is way better than the Rett syndrome results were. So this is, we were blown away by this result. And on the right-hand side, it just shows you what different things improved, and it's all centered around communication, cognitive function, and social interaction, and those are the 3 most important concerns in Phelan-McDermid syndrome. So again, the result couldn't have been better from the point of view of impacting what matters in Phelan-McDermid syndrome. We had another measure which is effectively the caregiver version of the CGI, so the caregiver impression of change, same scoring system. So here you can see average of 2.7, 2 kids got a 1, and 5 got a 2. So again, very, very similar result, and the right-hand side shows what moved, and it's the same story. So this is gold, because this is saying that the caregivers had the same view as the physicians, which is really important from a sort of consistency of the whole data. And just to mention also, these were not trials were conducted in one site. This was in 4 different sites in the US, supervised by the FDA, and those 2 patients who got a 1 were at different sites, so different raters. So again, this is much more powerful than if it had just been one site with a single person doing the rating. I haven't got time to go through these, but we talk about scores and numbers. Well, what matters is what happened to the kids, and this is reports of what improved in the kids. And again, it's all centered around improved communication, social interaction, cognitive ability, and motor as well, hand use, walking. So this is fantastic to see. Obviously, this is what it's all about. Pitt-Hopkins. This is going to seem like deja vu now, because it really was very similar. So, but before I get to the result, same story. Theoretical number of patients and known number of patients. This time, it's not 3 times Rett; it's about the same as Rett. So 6,000 to 7,000 and about 1,400 diagnosed today, but it's grown 30% in the last year. So again, no one's ever done anything in Pitt-Hopkins syndrome before. Now we're working in it, and everyone's becoming more aware of it. It's going to grow very rapidly from here. So these are the same measures. This time the CGI, again, remember that physician score, 2.6 average versus 2.4 in the Phelan-McDermid trial, and you've got, again, 1 patient with a 1 and 4 with a 2. Same thing on the right hand side. The most important things in Pitt-Hopkins: motor function, communication, and social interaction, and cognitive ability. Same things, and it's the same things moving again. So, and this is the caregiver version again. It's the same. So, strikingly similar result in both trials. And I just want to mention, out of our multiple indications, these two were always my favourites, and the reason is there's very little competition. There's really no one doing much in these indications, and we're well ahead of the competition. The other two that we're working in are not like that. There are quite a few other companies working in them. So we really have the possibility here to do what was done by us and then Acadia and Rett, and that's own this indication, set the price, and really dominate it. So we're going to go as fast as we can on these two indications to get them to market to make that a reality. Again, same thing as Philip doing. There's some great stuff coming out, individual things that happen with patients, and again across the same sort of things. So, just quick recap of the highlights. I'll close. So we have the first ever treatment for Rett syndrome approved by the FDA. Very, very proud of that. Launched by Acadia in April. Very successful launch. $177 million of sales in less than a full year. $370 to $420 guided for this year. The total economics we can get from Acadia is up to $1 billion US, plus the royalties from 10% to low 20%. We're accelerating the development of 2591 across multiple indications. We've got 2 positive trial results already. We think it's got other applications and other indications. And then we're in a great position to make the most of the options ahead of us with $243 million in the bank. So, we've had a fantastic last couple of years, but the next 6 months is almost more important than that. So, really looking forward to that. So thank you very much. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. A lot of the syndromes seem to have a broad sweep across the world. Are there ethnic genetic links to a lot of them, or are they all in Japan, China, Europe?
Yeah, they're all, they all appear to strike everywhere equally. They're all spontaneous, other than Fragile X. Fragile X is a bit different, that's inherited, but all the others are just spontaneous mutations, bad luck basically, and they do seem to strike everywhere equally.
Thanks, John. There's just been some chit-chat in the general Neuren community about the significance of one element of the deal with Acadia being that Neuren can't develop an indication that Acadia's already developed. Can you give us some colour on that?
Sure. So I sort of mentioned at the start that when we did the original deal with Acadia, they knew 2591 was there, so they didn't want us coming, with a better product and competing against them. So there was a non-competition requirement on us. When we did the expanded deal with them, we removed that for the 4 indications we were working in. It does remain for other indications, so trofinetide was developed in indications other than those 4. In theory, we couldn't develop 2591 in those, but it has to be a proper development plan approved by both companies and funded and going forward. And if they do that, then we benefit because we'll get royalties from that. So my expectations, I don't expect that to happen. I think it's a very remote chance of that happening. But for now, the stuff we're working on, they don't have any ability to stop that at all.
Hi, Rob. Thanks for all your work. I really appreciate it. Warren Buffett famously used to close investors when the share price was overpriced, tell people not to invest in it. From my point of view, the share price was once underpriced. I think it's probably fair at 30. Just wondering if you got a view on when you prefer the share price.
So I think I'm not allowed to give you my view. So all I'll just refer. We're pretty well covered by analysts. I've got 7 analysts, and they're all pretty clustered between 28 and 31, I think. So they have a similar view to your view. Very rational, logic behind all their models that they've built. So, and remember that's even though they call it price targets, that's not what it is. It's risk-adjusted valuations of what it's worth now is what that's based on. So, I mean, I think that's a pretty good and consistent reference.
Great presentation, thank you. Is there any potential for the framework that you're developing in the neurological disorders to be beneficial to other more common ones, such as Parkinson's and motor neuro? Or is that a pretty simple?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So, so IGF-1 just plays just a fundamental role in the brain, not just in development, but potentially in degeneration at the other end of life and brain injury. That's where the whole thing started, with brain injury all the way. So there has been stuff done in things like Parkinson's in the past. But the trouble is, those sort of things are not orphan indications for a start. So it's very difficult to mix orphan and non-orphan from a pricing point of view. You can't price big indications like that the same as you can orphan. As soon as you go into non-orphan indications, then the current US government sort of battle on drug pricing come into that, whereas you're exempted from it with orphan indications. And also the trials you have to run in those sort of indications are massive and long and very expensive. So we've chosen not to pursue that. We think what we're doing is the best sort of risk return for shareholders.
Can I just clarify in terms of the orphan status? That's obviously creating great revenue streams in the US. What are the similar rules and regulations in the rest of the world? There's great numbers of patients, but and the revenue actually brought in through.
No, sure. So Europe, Japan, Korea, very similar. So Europe is you get 12 years for a paediatric product, 12 years where they won't approve a generic. And in Japan it's 10, and in Korea it's 10 as well, I think. So those are very similar to the US. Other places are not. So good example is China, masses of patients, but at the moment the framework is not in place really to get the most out of that. But there is draft legislation in China about bringing in orphan drug systems. So to do that, that will change the game completely.
Another question here?
Yeah, so just on the previous question about the non-compete, so theoretically, if you're looking at the other indications, does that mean that you'd have to come to some form of agreement with Arcadia before you were to start a phase or do any trials in that particular disease?
Only if they. No, it's the other way around. I mean, they have to come with a proposal to develop trofinetide in that indication with a rationale, a plan, a budget, and actually, then execute that. So unless they do that, we don't have to. We don't have to.
NNZ, sorry.
Yeah, but for that. So that's the only way they can. So we're not going to go to Acadia and ask for permission to. It's not going to work like that. We'll do it, and remember, in the early stages, it's low cost. And if they decide they're going to develop trofinetide, well, it's got to be a real development plan that we will benefit from.
Yeah.
Is there one more on this side? Being very quiet on this side. Okay, John. Here we go.
John, just in terms of the deal with Arcadia, when does it expire? Is that on the patents or is that on the life of the product? And what is that?
So the royalties run until the later of 10 years or the expiry of the last patent. And we have patents going out to 2040 granted. So that will be beyond 10 years, obviously. It doesn't mean the agreement terminates, but the royalties stop at that point.
Thanks, John.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Brian. So we'll move on to Dimerix. Whilst no declaration of conflict is required here, it's fair to say that Horizon 3 has looked at Dimerix and is very impressed and on our watch list. As many of you will know, they're developing their proprietary drug DMX-200 in phase 3 trial for rare kidney disease, focal segmental glomerulosclerosis, which is going to be FSGS from now on, for which there are no approved treatments. Successfully passed first interim analysis point with potential for accelerated approval following second interim analysis in 2025. You'll let us know whether that's early or later. 2 licensing deals signed, valued up to 350 million Aussie dollars in upfront and potential milestone payments, plus additional royalties on sales. So hands up if you're a Dimerix investor. Okay, well, I think there are even numbers there. That's very good. As you would have noticed, their share price in the last 12 months has gone from, those who didn't have your hands up, listen up, 6 cents to 58 cents. Market cap improved from 24 million to 307 million in a year. So Dr. Nina Webster, who will present, joined Dimerix as CEO and Managing Director in 2018. Over 30 years experience in the pharmaceutical industry with leadership roles in investor relations, business development, intellectual property and product development. Formerly Commercial Director of for Acrax, so they're old buddies, an Australian pharmaceutical company that successfully developed a commercialised multiple products globally. Nina holds a PhD in pharmaceutics from Cardiff University, master's degree in intellectual property and in intellectual property law from Melbourne University and an MBA from RMIT. So Nina, thank you.
Thank you, Matt, and I bet you're wishing you were an investor last year now. So, tough act to follow from John, and well done to Neuren investors as well. For those who are not familiar with Dimerix, we are a listed company working in the space of inflammatory diseases, and I thought, given we are following that tough act with Neuren, I'd give you a little bit about the synergies between the two companies as well, and no, it's not about we both have an English accent. Like John, we also have some forward-looking statements. So, to start with, one of the synergies with Neuren is we've got a nice-looking share price graph at the moment, which is really nice to be able to point to. One of the key things for us is that we're also working in an orphan disease that has a paediatric indication or paediatric play. We also did those early deals, much like Neuren did, and we're in the middle of a phase 3 clinical trial, much like Neuren. So there's a trajectory and a similarity between the two different companies. We're currently trading, as Matt said, at yesterday close of business was $330 million. We had at the last quarter $35 million in the bank, so sufficiently funded for our clinical trial. So just putting that into context, what are we actually working in? We're working in a phase 3 indication, which is our lead candidate called DMX-200. It's in a disease called focal segmental glomerulosclerosis. Matt, you did an amazing job with that. FSGS, which is a rare type of kidney disease. It does affect children down to 2 years old as well as adults. Sadly, it is an all-comers disease. The average age in our clinical trial is only 40. It's not an old person's disease at all. There are no products approved anywhere in the world at the moment. We do have orphan drug designation, which of course comes with a number of different benefits, including pricing, faster access to market, and that exclusivity period that John was referring to as well. We have commercial validation of that product by the 2 licensing deals that we've closed over the last 6 months, but also the successful phase 3 interim analysis that we conducted in March this year, again demonstrating that our drug was doing exactly what we thought it was doing in the phase 2, in the phase 3 in a much bigger cohort. So again, gives us that confidence as we go through the phase 3 clinical trial. So just taking a step back, what is FSGS? Well, FSGS essentially means some sections of the kidney are scarred, and what happens is over time, more and more sections of the kidney become scarred until there's not enough left to function, and you end up in kidney failure on dialysis and or transplant. Now, if we start on the bottom left-hand side of this graphic here, you'll see the healthy kidney little graphic here. A healthy kidney is a really good filter. It filters the blood, and you should see little or no protein spilling through from the blood into the urine. What happens when the kidney becomes damaged on the right-hand side of that graphic is it becomes quite leaky, such as in the case of FSGS. And that means you see protein spilling from the blood into the urine. We call that proteinuria. And I want to highlight that as a word because that is something we measure in our clinical trial. And it's important because the amount of protein in the kidney tells us the rate of progression of your kidney disease. How fast is your kidney failing? If we can reduce the amount of protein in the urine, we are slowing down kidney disease progression. That is why it's really important to remember why we are measuring proteinuria or protein in the urine in our clinical trial. So FSGS itself, and again this will put into context how does the trial work and what are we looking for. If we start here at point number 1, patients when they come in with kidney disease have high blood pressure. That high blood pressure causes a lot of build-up of pressure in those kidney vessels, and it causes point number 2, inflammation of those cells. As the cells become inflamed over time, they become what's called fibrotic, or they're scarred, and that leads to point number 3, where they die off. And that's where you see that leaky kidney cells that we talked about with protein spilling through. Now, kidney cells are not like other cells in the body. They can't regenerate. This is why kidney disease is progressive. Once you've gone down that hill, you cannot go back up. So you now can imagine you go back to point number 1, there are less cells doing the work, so there's more pressure, causing more inflammation, causing more cell death. So you can imagine you go around faster and faster every time with fewer and fewer cells until there are not enough cells to filter the blood and your kidney fails. The current standard of care is a blood pressure medication. It works at point number 1. And our drug is what's called a CCR2 antagonist. It works on the inflammatory pathway, so it works at point number 2. So there is very much a synergy between the two, which is why in our clinical trial, patients stay on the blood pressure medication and they take our drug on top of that. So in our phase 2 clinical trial we completed in 2020, you can see on the bottom left-hand side of this graphic here, on that background blood pressure medication, they reduce that protein in the urine that I was referring to before by around about 17%. What they saw in that trial was when we added DMX-200, we doubled that effect. And that is what got nephrologists really excited around the world, is this really is having a clinically meaningful impact for these patients. 86% of patients in the trial saw a benefit on our drug over placebo, and there were no safety concerns in that study. Now, putting that into context of how does that relate to kidney disease and what does that mean for kidney disease in these patients, is that 17% we saw on our drug alone is clinically beneficial to these patients. And that's because, looking at this graphic here, on the left-hand side, you can see for every 10% decrease, we see a corresponding change in what's called eGFR, or kidney function slope. Now, if you can imagine, when you're a baby, you have a kidney function starting up here, quite high. As we all age, our kidney function declines, and it declines at a steady rate as we age. These FSGS patients, it's crashing. And when it crashes, it intersects with that kidney failure line. If we can move that slope back up more in line with natural aging, what we're trying to do is buy them a lot more time on their kidney. So for every 10% change in proteinuria, we could be buying these patients 5 to 7 years on the life of their kidney. Now you imagine that is 5 to 7 years that they do not need to go on dialysis, they do not require a transplant. This disease specifically, for those who get a transplant, 60% get reoccurring FSGS in the transplanted kidney. So that's not a solution either. So this is a really poor prognosis for these patients for which there is no treatment available at the moment. And this is where it's got us very excited with our 17% because we correlate across to the other side and we could well be seeing these changes on the eGFR slope for these patients. So talking about the clinical trial, as you can see in this picture, DMX-200 is a capsule. It's given as a single capsule twice a day, one in the morning, one in the evening. So it's a really simple dosing regime for these patients. The clinical trial itself is a fairly standard randomized study that randomized to either drug or placebo, and all patients stay on that background standard of care. Throughout this study, the full study is a 2-year study measuring that eGFR, so that kidney slope that I was referring to. But you have to measure that over a long period of time. Because of that, and because we have orphan drug designation, the regulators allow us to do interim analysis. An interim analysis using surrogate endpoints, and that is that proteinuria. What that means is that we could take 2 snapshots in time on how our study is performing. The first we took in March just gone, where we demonstrated that the drug is doing better than placebo. We're on track for those final endpoints. The second analysis is when 144 patients reach week 35. Now you can see here we've recruited just over 100 patients already. We've dosed just over 100, so we're well on our way to that 144. Based on current recruitment timelines, we could see that outcome middle of 2025. So we're not far away from a major inflection point and our clinical trial itself. that's important because if that data is compelling, there may be an opportunity to submit for what we call accelerated or conditional approval in some territories. That means going to market at that point while you continue the study in the background, and that is because there's such a high unmet need. So we're not far away from a potential marketing opportunity. This is a global study. We're recruiting everywhere. This is going to be in 170 clinical sites in 16 different countries. So you can imagine there's a lot of work happening behind the scenes in making sure we're opening up all of these sites at the moment. So not just through Latin America, US, also through Europe, but also Asia, because we have alignment with FDA, EMA, but also NMPA, which is the Chinese regulatory authority, that this study could fit all of those. One study fits all, which is very, very unusual as well. So what does that mean for marketing opportunity? Well, on the right-hand side here, you can just see some of these patients of numbers for diagnosed patients, and I want to specify the word diagnosed here. This is a disease that's diagnosed by what's called biopsy. It's a surgical procedure. So if you've been diagnosed, for example, in the US, it means you've got access to healthcare, and if you've got access to healthcare, you've got access to the treatment. So this is what we consider the addressable market that we're after. If you then look on the left-hand side of this graphic, what you can see here is what we see in pricing for a different type of rare kidney disease called IgA nephropathy. They're retailing at just shy of $10,000 US per patient per month in the US and just over $8,000 US per patient per month in Europe. So you can imagine with the numbers on the right-hand side with those pricing points, this is a really commercially attractive opportunity for us to move forward. I should highlight that is not what the patient pays. That is what the insurer pays, particularly when you look at the US, for example. Most patients will have the insurance, which goes through a reimbursement process. The patient will be out of pocket, typically on the lowest copay, so around $25, $35 per month. The rest of it is paid by insurers. Why are insurers happy to pay that? It is still cheaper than dialysis, and it gives these a much better quality of life. So in terms of the licensing deals that Matt referred to, we've completed 2 in the last 6 months. The first one was for Europe, the second one for the Middle East. With both of those deals collectively, that's up to 350 million Australian dollars in upfront and milestone payments, plus royalties on top of that. Our main focus now, of course, is those major markets outside of that, which is US and China. If you think about the slide before, that is a huge number of patients. In fact, US is the largest opportunity for us. So whilst we've seen a massive spike in our share price right now, we've seen a lot of growth coming through, we do think there is a lot of potential opportunity to come through in those deals to come as well. We're very much in deal-making mode at the moment. Partnering availability, we have made it public. We have received offers from various companies in various territories around the world. They are, of course, all non-binding, subject to negotiation and board approval, but nevertheless give a sense that this is a very attractive area at the moment with deals that could come through in the future. So just to summarise everything that I've just talked about, this is a late-stage opportunity in a phase 3 clinical trial, last one before market, potential early marketing opportunity middle of next year, in a disease, again, much like Neuren was talking about, nothing on market at the moment, clear market ahead of us, nothing else in phase 3, so we're the only ones in the prime position to move forward at the moment, with a good number of patients, good pricing opportunity, 2 deals under our belt with plenty more of upside to come. So that's where I wanted to leave it today, and I will pause and take any questions.
Thank you, Nina. I do have a couple of pre-submitted questions, so I'll put them through. On the 27th of Feb this year, you advised the market that the phase 3 data collection was complete, and on the 11th of March, advised that your candidate successfully passed. Could you please explain the process evaluation that occurred between those dates?
Yes, so when we collect data, of course, we're collecting urines and bloods. So they get sent off to a laboratory for analysis. It takes usually a week or 2 to get the analysis come through of those. In this instance, it's what's called a blinded analysis. We can't see the data ourselves. It can impact the integrity of the study. So what happens is we have an independent committee of nephrologists and statisticians who review that data to confirm that we're on track with our phase 3 statistically and that we're in line with what we saw in the phase 2 based on what they're setting there. So that's the process. 2 weeks is actually really fast.
And you may have answered this one in the presentation, but to this person's knowledge, it has only been announced that your candidate outperformed placebo. At what stage will we know the actual details, that is, by how much?
Yeah, so at the moment it's, as I mentioned, a blinded study. That is deliberate because when you take interim analysis, if you unblind, you actually can impact the integrity of the study and use up some of what we call the statistical spend of the study. So we preserve that to when we're getting to a marketing endpoint, that's why. So as we get to a marketing endpoint, if, for example, we see data that is compelling for next year, we may then look at unblinding and then putting in for a regulatory submission. Yeah.
Okay, questions from the floor?
Thanks, Ian. I've just got 2 quick questions. What's happened to the 8 patients from the phase 2 trial? Are you able to tell us?
Well, if they're eligible to join the current phase 3. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
We're not allowed to follow them once they're not in study.
Right, cool.
Yeah.
And do you have a ballpark figure of what this phase 3 is going to end up costing in total?
Yeah, so you can reverse engineer some of this as well. The first 72 patients cost us about 25 million. We're in the process of recruiting another 72 patients. That will give you a sense of what 72 patients costs. And the tail end is a really low cost because once you've opened up sites, the cost burn goes much, much lower. So it's a really inconsistent spend. It's very lumpy. There's no linear spend on this at all. And it's probably a good point to look for in those 4 Cs. You would have seen in the prior 4 Cs, we had a couple of big quarters, then a couple of really, really low quarters. The low quarters is what you're going to see once we've recruited patients, but opening up clinical sites is the most expensive part of a study. So don't be put off if you see a quarter that's bigger. That's not going to be consistent.
Proteinuria, can you tell us what the other endpoints are? So is it EGFR, is it creatinine level, is it body weight, urine?
Yeah, so EGFR is the primary endpoint alongside proteinuria. So they're both co-primary at the moment. Of course, there's a number of other metrics, secondary and tertiary. A lot of them will be lipids. Just to bear in mind, when we talk about proteinuria, we are talking about the protein to creatinine ratio. That's what they measure. And they usually do it over a 24-hour urine, so it's not a spot urine. That just makes sure it's more uniform over that period. So it's all the usual metrics as well. We'll measure PK, measuring what the bloods do there. As I said, the weight, any of the other components. So it's fairly standard for secondary tertiaries.
Yeah.
I just wondered about whether you feel you have a need for further capital raising.
No plans for any further capital at the moment. The funds that we have are sufficient to cover the clinical trial, certainly past that part 2 outcome that we're talking about middle of next year. But when we add in our R&D rebates that we'll be expecting, noting we got 8.9 million last year, that's sufficient to get us to the end of the study.
Do you have much sell-side broker research coverage?
Yes, we've got 3 analysts covering us at the moment. One of those is a paid, the other 2 are not. The 2 that are not is Euros Hartley and Petra Capital have both initiated on us in the last 2-3 months.
And Nina, what's beyond FSGS?
So yes, we do have a platform technology. We have very much, and we made this very public, we're focusing on delivering FSGS in the first instance to prove that platform. We have DMX 700 that's moving very slowly in the background. That's in chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, another interesting space, not rare disease. But certainly in our preclinical studies saw an 80% decrease in lung injury against control, so quite an interesting opportunity given it's the 3rd largest cause of death in the world. And then we have a platform of other what we call undisclosed opportunities. There is no point in adding to the pipeline if we don't have the money and people to do it. So as and when we get bigger, that's something that we'll address as a board.
With regards to the orphan drug status, can you just clarify if it's a rare disease you can get that, and if it's like COPD you can't? Is that
Yeah, so rare disease has or orphan drug has a definition. So an example is in the US, it must impact less than 200,000 people, and then it's considered a rare disease. So COPD would never fit that because it is the 3rd largest cause of death in the world. Never be an orphan drug. Yeah.
Thank you. Oh, okay. What last one?
Yeah, the COPD indicates, is that a different drug?
Yes.
Same platform?
Same platform, different drug.
What form is it in?
It's oral.
Still oral?
Still oral. Yeah, still small molecule. which again makes manufacturing relatively straightforward. One thing we didn't touch on actually is manufacturing. We have completed all of our commercial scale manufacturing. That is done. Registration batches are completed, so we're done. Just need the clinical trial result.
Thank you, Nina.
Thank you.
Thank you all for attending, but also thanks to Monsoon and FB Rice for organising and hosting. And now they would like to invite you to have some refreshments.